Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying. I will introduce our experts, local and national, in a minute. With their permission, I'm going to guide you to their bios rather than read them in careful detail so that I can grab those few precious moments to take the time to do a few thank yous. And I think they warrant more than just a hand and we clap and that's who they are. So I'm going to please put you on the spot and ask you to stand so that we can appropriately acknowledge you. And if you will allow me, because today, this session, as we see, is about building and supporting excellent teachers and leaders. Excellent teachers and leaders. Please know it is still about students. That's how we do it. Student achievement, student success, student completion. It is through those excellent teachers and leaders. So let's start with a few thank yous. I think it's most appropriate. Governor Hunt, may I put you on the spot to please stand so that we can appropriately acknowledge you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for putting education and teacher preparation in the national spotlight and keeping the focus on excellence. It's an honor to have you here today. Thank you. Another person group to recognize today in the commitment to outstanding and excellent teachers and educators and school leaders, and if I can, put our colleagues from the Benedum Foundation on the spot to please stand and be recognized. Jim DeNova, thank you so much for your support, not only of this event, but decades and decades of hard work, expertise, and support that you've brought to teacher preparation in the state of West Virginia. Thank you. And finally, most importantly, and I hope we do this in every room we're ever in, very similar to honoring military service, which is also so important. Finally, would all of the current or anyone who has ever taught, will all teachers please stand and be recognized? All teachers. Thank you. I hope you'll join me in making that a practice in everything we do and in every room, because it is that important. And that is the focus of this session today, how to prepare great teachers. I will add in there, given the last session, the importance of outstanding school counselors, the importance of outstanding school psychologists. So when we talk about school leaders, we talk about speech-language pathologists, we talk about school counselors, in addition to teachers. But let's talk about teachers for a minute. If I can, I'd like to frame this panel that we have gathered of experts. And I'm going to raise a few questions. And I'm going to go out on a limb and answer them. I'm going to answer them briefly, but I'm going to raise the questions. One, does the quality of a teacher matter? Yes. You will hear that today. Absolutely. Two, do we know some of the absolute essentials, the must-haves, if you will, not the nice-to-haves, the absolute must-haves of how to prepare excellent teachers? Do we know some of those? Yes, we do. We absolutely do. Third, is there really an educator shortage in West Virginia? Yes. Yes, there is. Next, is there really a national shortage of educators in the United States? Yes, there is. Do we know some of the reasons why for that shortage? Yes, we do, and you're going to hear it this morning from our experts. A question I get asked a lot, does West Virginia have a pathway for alternative certification for the preparation of teachers, and I will throw in, and school counselors? Yes, we do. And we look forward to sharing some of that with you this morning. Next, are there really 19 teacher preparation programs in the state of West Virginia? Yes, there are. Are we seeing a decline, even though the enrollment is up at the institutional level? Are we seeing a decline in West Virginia in those 19 teacher preparation programs in our colleges and schools of education? Yes, we are. And the final question, are the institutions of higher education in West Virginia willing to partner, willing to change at lightning speed, and willing to work collaboratively with you to be part of some solutions at a fast pace? Yes, we are. And that's what we're going to focus on this morning. So with that, we have tapped into both a national expert and our expert in the state. And I'd like to next call up, again, the bios are in your app. I'm pleased to share that we have brought out Dr. Forzani from the University of Michigan to give us a frame, a lens of a national model that pieces of it may work for West Virginia, but to again spark that dialogue. And then we'll have some comments from our state expert, Dr. Teresa Eagle, the Dean of the College of Education at Marshall University. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Forzani.
Thank you so much, Gypsy. And let me start by echoing Gypsy's thanks. I'm very appreciative of the chance to be in West Virginia and to be in a room with legislators and have the chance to speak with you all. I started my career as a teacher in rural Mississippi. I was there for 4 years, and I grew up in a rural region myself, and the challenges and the opportunities associated with rural regions are never far from my mind, so I'm particularly glad to be here to talk with you for that reason. As Gypsy said, I come from the University of Michigan. I work as the deputy director of an organization housed at the University of Michigan called Teaching Works. We are a national organization that primarily provides support to teacher preparation programs around the country. Right now, we work with about 25 different teacher education programs in more than 10 states. And we also build assessments that measure how well teachers are prepared for the classroom. We're currently working with ETS to develop a national licensure assessment that will replace the Praxis series. So I'm not sure which licensure assessment.
We use Praxis.
You do use Praxis, okay. So this is something you'll probably be hearing more about at some point soon. And we also do quite a bit of work to increase public awareness and understanding of what we call practices-based teacher education. Teaching Works grew out of an effort at the University of Michigan about 10 years ago to completely redesign our own teacher education program. The U of M has been fortunate for a long time to have a nationally recognized teacher ed program. So 10 years ago, nobody was saying that the program was bad. People thought it was quite good. But we recognized that our graduates were going out into classrooms and they were not able to do the basic things that we thought a novice teacher should be able to do well from day one on the job, despite preparation that we thought was decent and that lots of other people thought was pretty good. And we realized that the main reason was that there was no agreement at the University of Michigan about what a new teacher should be able to do well. People could say things like, oh, they should be able to engage students and they should hold high expectations and they should love kids and they should know their subjects. We kind of all agreed on that easy stuff. But when it came to specific practices, can you sit down with a kid and talk to the kid about content and understand what that child understands and doesn't understand about the content? Can you do that skillfully? Some of our graduates couldn't. Could they lead a class discussion that actually engaged lots of kids in the discussion and moved somewhere? It wasn't just talk, but it actually accomplished something. Most of them couldn't do that. Some of them could, but most of them could not. Could they build an assessment that actually got at important content and actually measured whether the children in their classroom were learning the things they were supposed to? Again, it was really inconsistent. And we realized that it was because we just were not being as careful as we should have been in our program about getting clear about what those core things were and making sure that the curriculum addressed every one of them, and then assessing whether the candidates could do those things before they left. And we embarked upon a huge redesign of our program with a lot of support from the Michigan Department of Education. At the time, we had to navigate the kind of licensure requirements in the state of Michigan. It was hard to have the space to make change without that support from the Michigan Department of Education, but we got the support we needed and were able to really fundamentally transform the program. It doesn't look anything like it did now. So I was asked to share a little bit about the model that we've developed with you, which is what I'm going to do, and I won't talk for very long. Because a lot of what I'm going to say is kind of in the weeds of teacher preparation. I'll take you inside, and then I'll just back right back out again, because I know most of you are not actually teacher educators yourselves. And we are still learning every day. One of the most exciting things about working with teacher preparation programs all across the United States is that we learn on a weekly basis why something we've created doesn't work in a particular place. It worked at the University of Michigan, but it does not work at the University of North Texas at Dallas, for instance. And our materials get better and our approach gets better as we learn from other people. So I look forward to questions. So as I said, we refer to the model we've developed as practices-based teacher education. Practice-based is a buzzword in teacher education right now, and people use that term to mean that teacher education is grounded in practice. That's obvious. What else would a professional training program be grounded in besides practice? And we don't use it anymore because it just kind of doesn't mean anything. But by practices, with the S at the end, we mean to convey that we believe that the curriculum of teacher education needs to be focused on specific practices like designing assessments, eliciting student thinking, leading classroom discussions, managing the classroom, building relationships with students, kind of really core practices of the profession. I've outlined a couple of features that we think are most important of practice-based teacher education here. So one of them is that everyone in the program, all the instructors and all of the students, understand the practices that they are supposed to be able to do well by the time they graduate. Another is that teacher candidates are given ample opportunity to practice those things and to receive coaching on them. By coaching, I mean our coaches do things like say, stand up straighter, speak loudly, get your hair out of your face, the kids cannot hear you. Wait a minute, stop. I don't think you listened to what Gypsy just said. Listen a little bit more closely and tell me what you think. We mean really intensive coaching of candidates because they have a really important job to do when they graduate. Another is ensuring that candidates actually have the knowledge they need to carry out the practices. So you're going to hear me talk a ton about practices in the next 10 minutes, but it's not just practice, it's obviously knowledge and commitments that get drawn upon to carry out the practices. And the final feature is that we assess candidates' progress toward basic competency. We don't allow them to move from one point of the program to the next until they've shown us that they can do what they need to do in order to go on. Another way to talk about this is to say that the curriculum is disciplined by practices. There's nothing there in the curriculum that you don't need in order to carry out a practice. And that might sound obvious, but 10 years ago our program didn't look like that. It had all these topics in it, like random policy topics or kind of sociological topics that were relevant to schooling, but they actually weren't necessary to being a first-year teacher. There's no time, so I don't know what the length of the programs are in West Virginia, but in Michigan, you're lucky to spend 3 semesters in a teacher prep program, sometimes 4. There's not enough time in that to learn to be a teacher if the curriculum is full of topics that are just kind of about schools and not about actually learning to teach. So we think about 3 buckets in the curriculum. The first is what I keep talking about, high leverage practices, practices that are really important for novices. And then the other 3 are supportive of carrying out practices. There's content knowledge for teaching. There's the foundational knowledge. There is foundational knowledge that is necessary to teaching, just not as much as I think as we once thought. And then we feel strongly that teachers incur ethical obligations to the kids they're teaching and the communities that they serve. So let me just say a couple more words about high leverage practices so that you know what I'm talking about. And I think that the set of 19 practices that TeachingWorks has identified and works with is in the app. So it's also on the TeachingWorks website. So if you Google TeachingWorks, you can get our 19 practices. By practices, we mean specific observable tasks of teaching. We don't talk about like holding high expectations for students because that's not a practice, it's a goal. We talk about specific things teachers do that enable you to get to that goal. And then by high leverage, we mean the practices are tied to students' learning. They're foundational to developing more advanced teaching capability, and they're useful across a whole range of contexts since many teachers move across grade levels and content areas even in the scope of the first few years of practice. I won't go into too much depth about content knowledge for teaching, but we worry about 2 kinds of content knowledge. We worry about actual subject matter knowledge, not just knowing the subject, but knowing the subject in the ways you need to know it in order to teach. We see candidates at the University of Michigan who are academically excellent. They can score off the charts on all kinds of tests, but when they try to explain to a 3rd grader why their solution to a subtraction problem is wrong, sometimes they cannot do it because they do not understand how kids think about math. And so when we think about content knowledge for teaching, we think about both those parts, the straight academic part and also the part where you think about how to unpack a subject matter from the perspective of a child, and particularly a child who's different from you and who thinks about the content in a way that's different from you. And then there is, so there's some of this is what I'm calling pedagogical content knowledge as well. I didn't call it that, but other people call it pedagogical content knowledge. Then there are topics in these foundational areas that are directly relevant. And the field of educational psychology, as I'm sure most of you know, has advanced rapidly in the last few years. We know a lot about how kids learn, and teachers need to know those things in order to teach. And then there's ethical obligations. I know you can't read this, but we've developed a set of obligations, again, that we think are critical for teachers, including novice teachers, and we worry about wrapping these into the curriculum that we offer as well, because there's no point in teaching if you're not doing it for a purpose. So how are teacher candidates supposed to learn these high leverage practices? One of the things we spend most of our time on at TeachingWorks is developing methods that will actually help teachers learn to teach. We developed, with colleagues across the country, a set of pedagogies that are specific to the practice of teaching. 10 years ago at the U of M, most of our teacher education happened in regular University of Michigan classrooms where they were mostly, it was very traditional. They might read a few articles, they would spend time talking about it. The instructor might give a lecture or a mini lesson of sorts, and there'd be a lot of conversation. That's not learning to teach. That's talking about teaching. It's talking about schools. They would then go out into the field and they would practice things on kids, on live kids. They had never practiced anything in the classroom. You know, my husband is a physician, and when he trained in medicine, he did not just go and do something. He didn't start sticking a needle in someone's spine. He practiced on mannequins. He practiced with coaching in simulated situations first. And we try to emulate that model at TeachingWorks, even though we recognize that there are pretty significant differences between fields like medicine and nursing and teaching. So I want to take you inside an example of one of the pedagogies we use. We call it a rehearsal. It's fairly obvious. We ask our candidates to practice what they're going to do with kids on each other with coaching from the teacher educator before they go out into schools. And again, this was something we were not doing very much of 10 years ago. So I'm going to show a video. It's very short. The context is that there are elementary teacher candidates at the University of Michigan. They're in an intensive summer program where they rehearse every morning and then teach summer school in the afternoons. So they are rehearsing teaching that they're actually about to go give in the afternoon. And in the video you're going to see, the novice teacher is practicing helping elementary students see patterns in numbers. So you'll see she has up on the whiteboard a bunch of numbers, 8, 18, 28, 38, and she's trying to get the kids to see things like every one ends in an 8. I'm not a math teacher, so I can't go into too much depth about this. But I was realizing last night, did I do this? Nope. Okay. This is a pure coincidence, but the teacher educator is the person whose head you can see down there in the bottom with the bun. That's my colleague Heather Beasley, who works at TeachingWorks. And she was actually born here in Morgantown. Again, I did not make that decision because of this. And she grew up in a town that she tells me is quite small called Athens. Her father was the president of Concord University for more than 20 years there. And I haven't told her that I'm here, but I think I know West Virginia is still very close to her heart, and she would probably be very happy to know I was showing the video. So she's down there in the corner, and she's coaching this young woman who is trying to practice what she's going to do in the afternoon with these numbers. So are there any questions about the context of the video? All right. Mike, you're going to play this?
I would stop there, and now we can explore patterns.
Okay. Let's see. Does anyone see a pattern here that now that we have a few more numbers up? I'm really quiet, so I can see a pattern. Heather?
They all end in 8. 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8.
You're right. So here we go. So they all end in 8. So all of the ones column has 8. All right. Does
So what would be a way that we could start, that Greta could start getting other students to think about the patterns? We don't want to get too much into why those patterns are there, but how could she orient us to the patterns that just got shared? What might she do? You can think about it too, Greta.
Well, that's what I was struggling with.
Yeah.
I said that with the students who said that yesterday, and I was like, ooh. I like that.
I agree.
Well, I think patterns that you want to highlight, you can have students just like restate, like or describe the pattern in their own words.
So what are some examples of patterns that we want to highlight based on our instructional goals, what we're working on? Okay, so the pattern that the digit in the tens place is going up, that we're going up by a group of 10 each time. So that's one pattern that you want to. Did anyone else see that pattern? Can someone else explain Janelle's pattern in their own words? What did she say she saw? What's another pattern that we care about?
The jump from 90 to 190 to 280, like as in the hundreds, like thinking about the hundreds.
Change into the
Yeah.
hundreds place.
So it's going up by 100 every time we go to the next across columns.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
This is what I was struggling with because my, yesterday, I don't think I did the community part well enough, but the kids were struggling with, like, seeing all the groups of 10. And so, can you give us some language about how to lead them to show that, like, the 10s are going up without telling them that the 10s are going up? Like, that's what I was struggling with. Without telling them what I wanted,
Yeah.
bringing it out of them because they were
Mike, you can stop it if you want. That's enough.
not there yesterday.
So focusing on the patterns will help some of that come up.
Thank you. So does anything strike you about this video? And I know a few of you are actually teacher educators, but I'm interested in what you think. Does this look obvious to you? Does it look novel?
I think it seems like a good exercise to basically just kind of have a group discussion about, best practices, ways to achieve the goal of the lesson.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think math years ago, I think I just would have been I'm just thinking back when I was younger and learning math, I think I just would have been instructed that it's going up by tens. So the whole thing seemed unique to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think we assume, as with teachers in teacher education and those of us that have been teachers, when we came out of the program and had our first classroom, I think everybody assumes that you know how to teach everything and you know all the content. And in the past, it was like you weren't a good teacher or you didn't know how to be a good teacher if you asked questions. And now we're moving to that being more the norm, that teachers can question each other and help each other.
Any last comment?
This will strike you odd, but the exercise is very important. The lady at the whiteboard used the word "like" more times than I could count. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's an interesting side point. We train a lot of young white women at the University of Michigan, and they use the word "like" a lot. That's a whole other topic, I would say. I will say more generally that I think the training of teachers is one of the biggest human capital problems we face in the United States. So right now, on this Friday morning, there are more than 3 million teachers in classrooms across the country teaching. Teaching is the largest occupational group that the Bureau of Labor maintains statistics on. We've got more teachers than we've got janitors and we've got nurses and we've got anybody. And what that means is we have to find some way of training relatively ordinary people. These are not going to all be Harvard graduates who go into teaching, to do really complicated work. So what we see in this video is a young woman who knows how to count by 10 herself, but she does not know how to explain to little kids what there is to notice about the way this works, why it works, what it means. She's trying to actually get at a lesson about place value here. And so she's getting some pretty close coaching from this teacher educator. And I don't think that there's a way to supply teachers at scale in any state, not to mention the country, without getting really serious about close coaching and close training of teachers the way we see in the video. So that's why I chose the video. And I'm interested in, I'm usually interested in responses from other teacher educators about this. So I think it's worth thinking about. And I'm going to wrap up and let my colleagues speak here. So I'll skip that slide and probably that slide too. I just want to linger before I close on the fact that there's so much we still need to know about teacher education. So I was self-conscious about coming up here and saying this is how we do it. I think the way we do it is a really important way to do it for the reasons I just said, but there's still quite a bit to learn. So I think this, and I know my colleagues here agree, so we're in the middle of all this and in the middle of it with you. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to jump back on stage. And now we're going to turn to Dr. Eagle for some reactive comments and also to share with us what are some of the ways we do this in West Virginia.
Great. Thank you, Gypsy. It's the first time I've been called an expert on anything, so I really feel like she set me up here for this. As Francesca and I talked a little bit earlier, one of the issues that we need to talk about is what does education preparation look like now in the state of West Virginia? Because the benefits that I see from looking at her practices and the way that they have changed their processes to something more innovative is what do we need to change and how do we go about that and how do we decide what those changes need to be. So I want to talk for just a minute about some of her assumptions about teacher prep in West Virginia because many of them are right on target. When we talk about teacher prep in the 19 educator preparation programs in West Virginia, by the way, 2 years ago there were 20. So one of the things that we're seeing is the increasing expectations and accreditation issues are becoming very, very difficult for educator preparation programs to meet the high standards. I want to assure you that we are held to very high standards that are growing every day. So we certainly are having to look at things like the teaching issues that Francesca's talked about. But when we talk about those presentations and those public and private institutions, basically all of them work on a similar basis. The three basic things that we have to talk about when we talk about our teacher education programs are skills, knowledge, and dispositions. And looking at your three buckets fits perfectly. Different terminology, but the same kind of expectations. So we all agree pretty much on the categories that need to be there for preparing good teachers. When we talk about those skills, knowledge, and dispositions, they fit into the model that she's presented, and they also fit into our coursework that we offer. The big difference that I see in terms of the model that Francesca has presented is the focus and the process. When we talk about getting students out there to practice, we talk about clinical practices. And I'm very proud of Marshall's clinical practices because we probably require more hours in a classroom for pre-teachers than anybody else does. And we're glad of that, and we know that it's important for what our teachers, our beginning teachers come out with. But I don't see some of the coaching practice and the intensive preparation that's there, which of course requires more resources, or a reallocation of resources, perhaps is a better way to put that. When we talk about the way that we send teachers out with their skills, we also talk about how do they get those skills, the pedagogical skills that you kind of shied away from that term, but we call them teaching methods. And so when we send a teacher out that's going to be teaching high school math, for example, they haven't gotten their math from the College of Education. They've gotten it from the College of Science. In many cases, the methodology classes are taught in those other colleges as well. So consequently, one of the things that we have to look at is how we organize teaching the methods to those folks. So, and basically what I'm saying is there's a lot of changes that would have to occur for us to adopt a model like this. And what I'm saying is our current model sounds a lot like what you came from, because it's, again, the basic traditional preparation. Now, we do have a lot of different avenues at this point for teacher preparation, but for the moment, just sticking to the traditional undergraduate, 4 years, 120 hours, that sort of thing, preparation. What would you suggest to us would be a starting point for looking at some of those changes we need to make and how we need to go about it?
Yeah, the key thing at the University of Michigan was coming to some consensus around the practices that we wanted people to be able to do. And that, embarrassingly, it took 6 years to come to agreement because nobody could agree. Once we had that done, though, it was relatively easy to rebuild the program. What we wiped away, we had a very traditional semester course structure where you took a methods course or an educational psychology course, et cetera, over the course of a semester. Literally wiped that away. And now our candidates take they're not called modules, but they're essentially modules. So they might spend 4 weeks learning to lead a discussion. They learn to lead it in elementary candidates, learn to lead it in math, science, ELA, et cetera. They think about what the differences are. Then they might spend just 2 weeks learning how to develop a quiz. Then they might move on to a 6-week unit on something else. And that took the support of the Michigan Department of Education, because we had to get a temporary waiver from all the requirements that we have typical courses. And it took incredible support from a very committed dean.
That's always important.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I wanted to mention, and you may want to react to this as well, as I mentioned earlier, we are held to very high standards by our accrediting body. The Board of Education requires that all teacher education programs in the state of West Virginia have national recognition, and the national recognition body is the Council, help me.
Accreditation of Education.
Yes, the Council for the Accreditation of Education Preparation. We have way too many acronyms. And basically, when we look at their requirements, as I said, they're very, very high, and they are increasing in the area of clinical practices as well. And so one of the concerns that I have is our ability to continue to meet their requirements, and we live or die by their requirements. As I mentioned, we went from 20 schools to 19 over the last couple of years. So we have to meet their requirements. I know that CAPE is used in Michigan as well, but CAPE is relatively new and still changing. Do you anticipate any issues that we would need to look at waivers or special requests from accreditation before we would do any of these issues?
Yeah, CAPE was just forming when we started all this, and we also had a number of conversations with them to make sure that we were proactive about it. We said, look, we're trying to improve. This is what we're going to be doing. Can you work with us and be flexible? And they were. But it's still, I was not directly involved in the CAPE accreditation process, which we just finished. It was pretty arduous. I would recommend getting out in front of it.
That's a nice
No, I wouldn't be reactive to them. I would go to them and say, we are trying to make changes. We are trying to improve. Here's what we're trying to do. Can you help us? Do you have resources for us? I think that will go much better.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. If I may go ahead, Dixie, or Dixie, I told you Dixie, Gypsy. One of the things that this requires, and one of the things that any improvement in education and the preparation of good teachers requires, is that we're all on the same page. And since the majority of our folks here are legislators, I'm going to talk to a great extent on how that affects you and what you do affects us. Because one of the things that I've seen and have heard over the last day or so is the need to change. And someone mentioned earlier, no one likes change, or everyone likes change until it affects them directly. Well, I'll tell you folks that we have been through so many changes in educator preparation over the last 3 to 4 years that just keeping up with what we can do, what we're able to do, and then how we go about taking care of that is really, it's really been a hamster wheel. So I don't think there is any question that our educator preparation programs are willing to change and are willing to reach out and do some things differently. But I would ask that as we look at some of those different things, that you consider, as you make the decisions that are going to affect all of us, what the implications are down the road for that and what the implications are for resources. my faculty keep coming back and saying, you know, what can we do? What can we do? Can we get more money for this? And my answer is always no. We're not going to get any more money for this. What we have to do is learn to repurpose what we have. And in terms of redoing our teacher education programs to produce better, more prepared teachers in the classroom, we're going to have to look very closely at our resources and what we must have, minimum level to move forward, as well as how we can use that in a better way.
Fantastic, thank you. I have one quick question and then want to open it up to the group. As you mentioned, we're all accredited. We seek accreditation through CAPE. West Virginia, it varies by state. In many states, the State Board of Education does the program approval. In some states, you're not even allowed to go up for accreditation, and in some states, you must. Every state signs a MOU with the accrediting agency. West Virginia has chosen not to do a state board program approval process, and it's deferred to CAPE. That's our process for program approval. It is a very extensive national accreditation process. It's an outstanding, very rigorous. And that's where there are many must-haves, not nice-to-haves, must-haves. And one of the key cornerstones is very strong school partnerships. We can call them PDSs, professional development schools. We can call them learning communities. The list goes on. And you alluded to that gone are the days where you sit in higher education and never get out into a school until you go student teach. That was the old model. And that was the first time. And we can think of how scary that was. Mm-hmm. That's long gone. All of our teacher candidates are out there now in their first semester, and we guide them through. So a must-have is these very, very strong school partners. Can you talk about that? How do you develop these strong school partnerships that are critical to teacher preparation?
That's a very good question, because it is critical, and it goes back to that idea that we're all on the same team. The professional development schools, a very specific organization in very specifically funded areas, are a fabulous, fabulous opportunity for us to work with teachers in the field, as well as our student teachers or pre-teachers, and learn, keeping on task with what's actually happening in the classroom, as well as giving them an opportunity for some of that coaching that you mentioned on a less formal basis. One of our problems, of course, is that, again, that requires some support. And our PDS schools have lost a great deal of support, a significant amount of support over the last 2 or 3 years. And so we're struggling to keep up the same efforts with the same products without having the financial backing to do that. So we're shifting our purposes a little bit to make sure that we continue to do that. To develop those strong partnerships, we must have good relationships with the principals in those schools. We must have good relationships with the faculty in those schools. And we have to have people that communicate well. One of the comments yesterday about being able to be hired was being a good communicator. And I kept hearing that and saying, that is so consistent no matter what we're doing. We've got to have good communication. And sometimes that's the very thing that holds us back from doing some of these things. In that respect, we also need to be willing to get out of the ivory tower. I've heard that term mentioned so many times when I was in public schools, because that's where I came from. And I happen to have started my process in higher ed in an area in which it was going out. It used to be called the West Virginia College of Graduate Studies. And their whole purpose was going out into the various counties and schools. I switched from that into a very traditional program where going out into the schools was considered more of an effort, something that you did on a rare basis when you absolutely had to. And so I find myself really torn in that respect, because I'm constantly pushing teachers out of the building. Not literally, although I've thought about that for a couple of things, but constantly trying to get them out there to see things. So again, the professional development school concept has us getting people out there as well. Frank mentioned yesterday the idea of staff development, professional development, and our concerns about losing some of our venues for that, Center for Professional Development, our REISs and so forth. I would say the same thing that he did about our professional development schools, and that is such an important concept, such an important relationship, and you're going to hear from one of our schools here in a little bit, but it is so critical. That's something we can't lose. And while the funding may look different and the support may look different and how we achieve it may look different, we can't afford to lose that ability to do those kinds of actions.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think it's time to hear from you. What questions do you have, comments? Again, a national, local expert. Yes, please.
Thank you. For Dr. Eagle, you mentioned change and I guess being difficult when it affects you. Who or what has driven the change? As a legislator, we make different decisions and we don't oftentimes know what the effect is going to be on you. So who or what has actually driven the recent changes, and were you consulted before those changes were made?
Usually not. There are two things that drive our decisions and changes. I should say three. First of all, the university itself. And of course, we know that universities have changed their revenue streams and have lost that. So I'm constantly getting pressure to do things with less. So that's one of the things that change causes us to change. But the other two places where the change comes about are from Kate, the accreditor, who is constantly giving us information about what we need to do differently. But probably our biggest drive is the West Virginia Board of Education. And they take, of course, many of their directions from promulgating a rule, as you all asked them to do, for things like alternative certification. When we talk about some of the changes that have happened over the last 2 or 3 years, I'll give you just a few examples. One is the Teacher in Residence program. Teacher in Residence program is a fabulous program. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, it allows us to send our seniors out into schools. They are hired at a reduced amount of money, and they actually are the teacher in the classroom. They require much more support from us as the university. They also require support from the school itself. So that's been a change of the way we look at the way we serve and support those folks. But it's a great way to get that well-prepared new teacher into the school as soon as possible to try to address some of the shortages that we have. And we've had some great experiences with that. One of the other issues, the alternative certification. The alternative certification program made us all sit up and take notice and see what we needed to do. And I don't think anyone will tell you that alternative certification is their first choice of a way to get a teacher into a school, because it misses a lot of the things that we talk about being vital to teacher preparation. But it does get us people who are content savvy and who are interested in being teachers, and that we can help to train along the way. Our first, as higher ed, I'll just speak for the whole group, and I don't think anyone will contradict me, our first reaction to that was, that's not possible, that's wrong, we can't do that. When we stepped back and said, okay, we're going to have to fill in some of these 700 and some positions that was mentioned yesterday.
718.
One of the things that Marshall decided was, it may not be the best option, but it's what we've got to work with, and so we're going to participate so that we can see that those folks get the very best that we have to offer. So we've become a real viable part in that. We're involved across the state in almost every county and all but one RESA, I believe. So we have a lot of things going in that. I would say, though, this is one of the things that affects what we do. When that was written up in policy, it requires 6 hours of training. Now, my first, as a college person, my first idea is that's 6 credit hours. No, it says 6 hours. So the plans that have been going forward and being approved do not have to have more than 6 actual clock hours of training. That is a big difference from 6 hours of credit hours in terms of what we can actually provide for those folks as far as support. Maybe that's good, maybe it's not, but it's definitely something that affected us. One of the other pieces is the idea of the praxis. And the praxis changes that have come out in Policy 5100 most recently have required, number one, that a teacher who has licensure already can get licensed in another area simply by passing the praxis. That means that while they are justified as having content knowledge, they have not had any of the methodology or the specific things that require a teacher to teach that specific thing. For example, I have licensures in English and math. I've never taught English. It would scare me to walk into an English classroom and teach. I can teach math with my eyes closed. But if I decided one day, okay, my school needs a physics teacher, I'm going to bone up on physics and go learn how to teach that, I could do that by passing that test. But I would never have had any experience or assistance in going into that classroom and teaching. So that's another issue that is a real concern for us. And we've had several conversations about how, as professional development, we can provide some support for those folks. But that was a big issue, big important thing. Another one coming up is also in that policy. If our teachers cannot pass the content praxis, after 2 failures, we have to provide remediation. I'm not saying that as a negative thing because I think that's what we should do. But again, it's something that requires us to change something that we go about doing. And it does require us, again, to look at our dwindling resources and how we can do that better.
Very good. I know we had a question here. Thank you for that question. We had a question here, I believe. Yes, sir.
Just a follow-up. One of y'all mentioned that I guess the old way was that a student teacher going through college didn't actually hit the classroom until they did their student teaching. I don't know how far back we're talking about, but I went to Shepherd, and depending on which your subject matter was, whether you're an elementary or a math or physical education teacher, I think every student teacher, somebody that was going through the student teacher program at Shepherd back in the late 80s anyway,
Yeah.
were in the classroom doing some type of field experience no later than their second year. So that's why I kind of question what you were.
Right, that was,
I mean, Shepherd's always done it that way.
Right.
And as far as the option 4, what used to be called option 4, my wife, who met me and I had taught at Shepherd and also at the high school level, but she was a science teacher, which are very hard to come by these days.
Yes.
And have been for years. But in 2000, she actually went through your program at Marshall. It was in concert with Shepherd, and it was an excellent program. And so it can happen, and,
Yes.
and she was a very successful teacher for many years.
And that program was the Master of Arts in Teaching.
That's right.
That-
And we
Correct.
do take those things that are missing from a person who hasn't gone through the undergraduate. So she got all of that pedagogical knowledge too.
Yeah, but it was before Shepherd became, I think, a university, and it was a partnership. Thank you.
fantastic. They're also a partner on our public education consortium. I think we have time for one last question.
Dr. Forzani, I suspect you might be able to bring some interesting perspective to the question of alternative teacher certification. I see from your bio that you participated in the Teach for America program, and could you share some perspective as to, what types of supports are needed in order to ensure that those individuals are successful and can, attain the additional training that's needed to be successful in the classroom?
Yeah, I am agnostic about the pathway people take into teaching. I don't think there's any evidence that the pathway in particular matters, whether you go through Teach for America or somewhere else. What matters is what you learn to do in that program. And that's where I think the core high leverage practices come in. I think we have to be, as educators and as citizens, we have to say a novice teacher has to be able to do some basic things, whether they're coming through Teach for America or they're coming through West Virginia University or wherever, because it's teaching. I mean, it varies by community, but it doesn't vary that much, right? And so I don't think the pathway matters so much. 6 hours, can you learn to teach in 6 hours? I know I couldn't have learned to teach in 6 hours. So when you have something extreme like that, I think it's easy to say most people are probably not going to be able to learn to teach effectively in that kind of a situation. But I don't know, how many hours does it take? I don't know, and I don't think there's any research on how many hours it takes. So it's not that I think the pathway doesn't matter at all. I think the pathway has to support the learning of things, but I think it's what you're learning to do is what matters most.
And could you speak briefly to what drove the initiative that was undertaken at the University of Michigan to revisit, their curriculum? Was it feedback you were getting from your students? Was it feedback that you're getting from your K through 12 institutions? Does the University of Michigan have a performance-based funding model, or does Michigan have a performance-based model? And was that Was that precipitating the
No.
change?
It was feedback from graduates, and it was some faculty members were actually collecting some data on what our graduates were doing. I mean, and it was a desire to do better. The state of Michigan exports more than 50% of the teachers we train, and the University of Michigan exports even more than that. So it's a different situation than here, where people are kind of growing themselves. So it really was just a proactive desire to see what was happening in classrooms and to make it better.
I was given the cue to wrap up.
Yeah,
Thank
go.
you so much. In the spirit of wrapping up, thank you so much. We're available for questions that you might have about our programs, ideas you have. Please know we care first and foremost about quality. Quality teachers. That is what you will always hear first. And if I can put in one plea and beg from each legislator, please spend a day in a school. There are so many amazing teachers in West Virginia. Please, if you haven't had that opportunity, spend a day in a school. It will be very informative. But that is our commitment to preparing the absolute best. We want to work with you. There is a reality. I was thinking of John Duskin's comments yesterday about competition. There is a reality about what we're facing, and that we're going to need to partner together for innovative strategies. It's real. We knew it was coming. There's lots of reasons, but you're going to hear from an amazing principal in a minute here, an amazing school leader. When I saw Ryan, I said, "How are you?" And then the next question immediately I asked, "Are you fully staffed?" Because that's what I know to do, to ask every principal and superintendent I see. I received a call last week from someone from another state that said, "You all prepare great teachers in West Virginia. We're 1,200 short right now. Right now. Can we have some of your teachers?" I said, "No." They're 1,200 short right now. I said, "How many are you predicting for the fall?" They said, "We can't even think about that. It's so overwhelming." So we look forward to partnering with you to get those very best students into the absolute best profession there is. Thank you so much for being here, and you are going to hear from an amazing school next. Thank you to our experts. Thank you.